Welcome to The Cynical Developer, the podcast that helps you to improve your development knowledge and career through explaining the latest and greatest in development technology and providing you with what you need to succeed as a developer. In this episode, we talk to Sam Schutte about leadership for developers. Sam is the founder and CEO of Unstoppable Software Incorporated. As CEO, Sam has guided Unstoppable's focus on two main client verticals, healthcare and industrial manufacturing, which has led to unique insights on software usability and process improvement for users. He also guided Unstoppable's unique approach to agile software development called value-driven development. There might be another show in there. Using these approaches, it's not uncommon for Unstoppable's customers to see return on investments upwards of 800% on their custom systems investment. Sam hosts the podcast Unstoppable Talk, which covers the intersection of business innovation and technology. He blogs regularly and is an active volunteer for his local Cincinnati Rotary Club. And on top of all of those achievements, he's now been on The Cynical Developer. So welcome to The Cynical Developer, Sam.
Thank you, James. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on. Another fellow podcaster in a slightly different but related sort of area. It's always good to get other podcasters on, and they can point out where my shortcomings as a podcaster are.
No, and I definitely have, certainly at times in my life, been a cynical developer, so it makes sense.
Yeah. When I was trying to come up with a name for what I was going to call it, or I just couldn't come up with everything, and I was very much like, well, everything's gone, everything decent is taken. Why is everything taken? It's taken by these people that aren't doing it properly. They're not using the name. And that's quite cynical. Well, that's not bad. Let's go with that. And it also works quite well when we're talking about technology and comparing one off the other. You know, I can be that horrible customer. Why should I use you and not the other one? So I think it works quite well.
Yeah.
So your company is called Unstoppable Software, and I have a friend who has a company almost. With a similar name company to that, and it's really, really powerful name. I think I quite like that name.
Thanks.
But no problem. But we're not here to talk about your business as such, but we're here to talk about leadership. And I think that this is a quite a hot topic, I think, for developers, because they get to a certain part in their career, and often they feel that that's the next step. But it isn't always. And then you get people starting out who maybe they do want to go into leadership, but they don't know where to start. Because leadership means so many different things, depending on what you're doing and where you're coming at it from as well. And I think for myself, it's more of a mindset really than a role. But as a starter for 10, I think a good question to start on would be what leadership isn't. Are you able to tell us what it's not?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I can tell you kind of like in my opinion of it, for sure. I mean, I think a lot of people think that leadership is about power, and it can be, but at least in terms of the world of software development and leading teams of developers, you know, it shouldn't be about power or ego or being the boss or being in control. You know, it needs to be much more about enabling, empowering, coaching, and basically trying to figure out how to create a high performance team, which you're unlikely to do with an iron fist, right? And there are various forms of leadership. You know, there's experts out there, greater experts than I, but different forms of leadership work better or worse for different kinds of teams. If you're in the military, there's certain kinds of leadership that is going to work, and that doesn't always work for all other industries. So I think, at least from my perspective, I don't think that leadership is about exerting, your control and authority over others. It's probably the nicest way to encapsulate it.
Yeah. I've definitely had bosses that try to, or have tried to lead with that iron fist that you talked about, and I just don't think it works. It just doesn't work for me, because I think developers or tech people in general tend to be relatively highly strung, and if you push on them too hard, they're gonna push back.
Yeah.
And I've always had the mentality of being in this together. So even as a team lead or head of department, it's always been that I'd get down in the pits, if you like, and work with the men, and show them, we're in this together, sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think it's probably helps to have specific examples, right? Because it's kind of a general, maybe a little too high level to just say, don't be authoritarian, right? That's a kind of a simplification. But I think, if I look back on my career, there were some bosses that were great bosses that were inspiring, motivating, and that could get more from a team because the team wanted to please the person and they wanted to make that person look good. And collectively, we wanted to win at the game, if you will.
Yeah.
And then other bosses I've had before I started my company that were nothing but, demotivating. And there's a couple kind of archetypes I think of, right? There are folks out there who, one boss I had in the past, one, let's say development leader, let's call it that. She just basically believed that her, the way that you got performance out of people was to dog them, right? Was her phrase. And I was talking about just recently with someone and, just basically constantly threatening, if you don't perform and you don't exceed expectations, you'll be fired. That's not a way to get an artistic, creative, intellectual, scientific person that is typically kind of what wraps up into being a software developer. That is not what gets them motivated, right? Particularly when they can go anywhere at any time and probably make more money, right?
Yeah.
And then other folks that I've worked with that are better. So I guess what I've done over time is pick that, seen what doesn't work and then seen what does work and sort of picked pieces of each to avoid or do, right? One of the best bosses I've ever had, he just said, basically, my only purpose here is just to get out of the way, get things out of the way. That's it. If everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing and nobody's being blocked, then you don't ever need to talk to me, And there's a lot of ways that kind of plays out in project scheduling and everything else, right? I mean, a lot of, a major thing you see with developers in leadership is they say, well, I'm the lead developer or I'm the team leader or whatever your title is. And a lot of those titles are kind of made up anyway, right? I'm the architect, right?
Yeah.
A lot of folks will say that means I'm going to grab like the coolest, hardest, most, difficult part, or I'm going to frame out the whole structure of the way the system needs to work. And then you guys just come and fill in the blanks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's, that makes them a bottleneck, right? And it also takes away the fun part maybe, or some of the best parts from perhaps the stronger developers, right? And so, one of the bosses I mentioned, I mean, he just basically said, look, I'm the team lead, so all I'm doing is reports. I'm just doing reports. And it's like, well, isn't that what the junior developer should be doing is reports? He's like, no, because I'm the one that's in meetings all day long. You don't want me holding up the whole project because I'm supposed to write the API or something, right? Or whatever more complicated part. So, that's just a couple slivers of it is, there's a whole lot of areas that I think in particular with software developers, you have to motivate them, stay out of the way, fix problems as they arise. But 99% of problems are just going to be misunderstandings where they just don't understand exactly what they're trying to achieve. Right. And basically try to be a good coach for them.
Yeah, definitely. I've definitely worked for all those different types of bosses as well, and the Iron Fist one you talked about, where it was a her way or the highway. Mm-hmm. In my experience, that leads only one way to a disenchanted team or no team at all because they all up and leave. Because even in tight times, it's often an employee market, not an employer market.
Yeah,
companies are always going to need software developers until AI gets that advanced, so they can walk out of a job today and walk into another job tomorrow. And I think some people fail to see that, and that they see having seeing that their position that they're giving to that software developer as a privilege to that software developer for them to be there.
Yep.
Where in matter of fact, it's probably the other way around.
Yeah. I mean, your people are the most valuable asset you have. And I think, if you look at, with my developers, I try to give them, a lot of times developers have all the responsibility and none of the authority, right? They have to just make things happen. And when it doesn't happen, it's their fault, but they don't get to actually make the choices that lead to success or failure because those get made for them and passed down, right? So I try to be very conscious about, giving them that authority. I mean, I'll argue if I disagree, about a particular architecture or something. But I would rather sort of let them, when there's a lot of decisions that people, particularly like technical leadership, they get all balled up about, they get all caught up in, oh, should we do this or we use this platform or that platform? And, there really is no right answer. But by basically, you can imagine, I mean, I've seen this many times. You go and you talk to all your lead developers, architects, whoever, and then you basically overrule them. Well, I know you all said we needed to use, Java, but I don't like Java, so we're going to use .NET or something. It's like, well, then why did you ask us? Why do you waste our time? And again, that's getting in the way of the process. Because if 9 out of your 10 architects say that we should use Java, then that's what you should use. Like, it doesn't matter what, you individually are going to hurt things by overruling them and overriding them. And, again, that shouldn't be your job. Your job should just be to get that answer in the first place, and there's exceptions to that. You can't necessarily let, the inmates run the asylum or whatever expression you want to use, right? Yeah. I mean, if folks just don't, if folks don't have the background to make the right decision, then you educate and you explain, well, I don't agree with that and here's why. But, you have to I think you have to let go of a lot of control and give people a responsibility and give them a job, and if you do, because ultimately I think that's, what I try to do in the model of leadership that I like is basically, empower those people so that they become team members that care about the outcome, right? I mean, there's nothing more destructive with any technology team than folks that just don't care about the outcome because they feel powerless, And so if you can have them buy into the mission because you say, look, this is your decision and you're going to have to, sleep with the consequences of it, right? Or live with the consequences of it. Hey, I mean, they'll make that decision and then there shouldn't be any finger pointing past that point, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's important too, is to try to give, I mean, it can't be all things, but to try to give some authority over things that they're responsible for.
Yeah, no, I've in my past where I've led teams, I've definitely fallen afoul of, I think one of the examples you gave there of designing the platform and handing over a shell and going, fill in all the bits and do it this way. And if you don't do it that way, tough. That's the way it's got to be done. I've definitely done that in the past. And as you say, you work with other leaders and you pick up different pieces from them. And I think that some of the best leaders I've worked for and some of the best leadership that I've given is when you, as you say, hand that leadership over in a way to the team to make that autonomous decision. But I think it's a very fine line that you've got to walk, because what you don't want to do is go, you go and do anything you like. What you see fit, go and do that. For them to then go off and down a rabbit hole and you never deliver your product. So you've got to have some control over what they're doing, but still let them make their choices and fall on their own swords. And I think I mentioned as well about being a part of the team. It's not an us and them type thing when you're a leader. It's I say you're down there with them, and it's all of you that are working towards that end goal. But you've got to be very careful that you don't get it to the point where it's all it's a word I'm looking for. I'd call it like very matey, but that's probably a bit of a British colloquialism, but overly friendly, because when it comes to the point where you need to be the boss, that then becomes quite hard at times, especially if it's in a not particularly nice situation.
Yeah, and it can be difficult, if you want to, because I think bottom line is, my approach to leadership and teams is pretty egalitarian, right? And it can sometimes be difficult to shift over and say, okay, now I have to be the law of the land, right? Because this person isn't playing by the rules, whatever it might be. And that always happens. I mean, it's going to happen. Hopefully very little. And I think I've been pretty lucky on with most of my staff that it's extremely rare that somebody's abusing the system or something, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, you have to have that line in the sand, I guess. I think, ultimately, if you do sort of treat everyone equally and give them that authority, they'll respect that and they'll kind of do the same back to you. I mean, they won't, you don't want people to sort of assume the role of the sort of like, sneaky employee or something that is just kind of doing the barrel just enough to get by but not get caught type thing. You want people to just be open and honest. Like if they're frustrated, tell you. But if they feel like when they're frustrated they get the hammer down on them, that's no good either, right? I think another thing that a lot of technical leadership struggles with is simply just letting go of every decision, right? And I think I experienced this as I sort of went more into, when I started the company, I mean, I was the sole employee, sole developer, and then I would add other developers that I was coding with. And then as time has gone on, I haven't written code myself in several years now, because I've moved more into that upper management role. And then, the developers in those teams do that stuff. And, I think initially, and I've seen this firsthand with a lot of lead developers, team leaders, whatever you want to call them, where they'll see a piece of code checked in and they just jump all over it. Well, this isn't right, and that's not right, and this isn't right, and why'd you choose this, and why da 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 da. And just tear folks apart because they are the expert, they are the architect, right? And so this developer checked in stuff that does not meet my standards, and now I'm going to beat them up about it, because they just developers are particular, right? And I've probably made that mistake myself in the past, but I think I've gotten better. And what I try to do more is like, just number one, not every decision has to be perfect because you're not going to make every decision perfectly either. And you really don't know what the right decision is. I mean, you have your gut and there's some things you might look at and think, I think that's a mistake. But sometimes it's worse to point out every mistake than to let some mistakes slide and allow that to empower the person. Right.
Oh, definitely. I worked with a senior developer who believed on every pull request, he had to find at least one thing to berate you on.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he hadn't done a pull request diligently enough because he obviously hadn't looked at it enough.
Yeah.
But it got to the point where he was alienating the team because they were dreading putting a PR in because they knew they were going to have a 15-minute argument about why there was two line returns under that method name, and things like that. They're slightly sloppy things, or and that's probably a frivolous example. But it's like, is it really worth causing that aggro over?
But yeah, I think it's also like 9 times out of 10, like you should give them the benefit of the doubt. Like there's going to be sloppy code. There's going to be code that was written at it's like I remember in one of my first jobs as a developer, we'd always call it 4 a.m. code, right? Because we'd be trying to hit a deadline, or we'd be over, behind on schedule, and we'd be in there. I mean, we were. This was a commercial product company, and so we had very hard deadlines from investors and stuff. And we were actually publicly traded, so I mean, if you missed a deadline, your stock was tanking, right? And we would be in there till 4 a.m. working, and we'd come in the next day at like 9:30, a little late, and we'd look at it like, what the hell was I doing? Like, what does this even mean? Like the code would just, and it's like, Control A, delete, right? Because it was just garbage. And but let the developers sort of take pride in what they're doing and fix their own problems and not berate them about every little thing, because then you're just discouraging innovation, you're discouraging chance taking, and I think I mean even the mistakes, which might be somewhat major mistakes, if the customer's happy, who cares? I mean, we did a project recently where some technical choices I kind of allowed the team to make, and I kind of I allowed the decision, thinking like, I'm not really completely sure it's the right one, but they think it is, so hey, I'm going to trust them. And in the end, I think probably the way I wanted things maybe would have been slightly better, but customer loves it. So what does it matter? I mean, why? I mean, that would be totally ridiculous if I say, hey, I know the customer loves it and they love this project, but I think what you guys did was wrong.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
But that happened.
Your customer doesn't care if it was C#, if it was Java, or if it was Go or something else. They just care that, does it do what I want it to do? I.e., does it give me the end result? That's all they care about.
Yeah, and I think you have to, because there's 100 ways, but any particular feature that a customer wants or user story, there's 100 ways to implement it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But someone in a leadership position probably sees one of those 100 as the way it should be done, right? But it's like allow for some wiggle room and allow for some mistakes, and I mean, I used to work at another company once that, any mistake that happened, their heads had to roll, and it's like, and that place had an incredible revolving door. I mean, I think I took the job there, and 2 weeks later, my boss quit, right? And it was like, whoa, what is happening here?
Yeah.
I mean, every 6 months, the whole team was being replaced, maybe 10 people or whatever. And it's because the leadership at that time, any slight mistake, anything, a bug in the code, someone's head had to roll, and it's just ridiculous.
I worked for a client that was almost identical to that. Before I joined in, and there was one guy that had been there for 10 years. Everyone else was in the team was brand new or had only been there a couple of months. And when I went back and you looked at the turnover, and you sort of traced it back to a certain point, and you realized that all the teams that this one particular person had input on had massive turnover. And I sort of sat back and thought, why have the upper management not looked at this and not thought, oh, it's not the product, it's not the teams themselves, but it's that one manager? And then when I came in, I sort of defended and blocked the team from any of the negativity from that one manager. I just dealt with it and kept them shielded. And we managed to keep the team together, and didn't lose a member of staff. I think one guy left because he was moving somewhere else. We lost one person because he just wasn't pulling his weight.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone else was fine. And then I left, and within, I think it was 3 months, the whole team had gone. Even the guy that had been there for 10 years had decided, enough's enough. I'm off. I can see where the issue is now.
Yeah.
And he went. It's mind blowing that one person that doesn't really have any direct impact, when you look at it on the face value, it's amazing what impact they really do have on the team and the morale, and whether your team delivers anything or provides value to the company.
Yeah, it's interesting. On my podcast, I interviewed someone last week, 2 individuals from a company called Sales Fuel. And the one gentleman in the group is an author, and he had written a book on sales management that was all about identifying basically toxic assets, toxicity, and avoiding toxicity on your teams. And it's pretty fascinating because he basically figured out, he's kind of a psychology buff, and he figured out these 13 archetypes of toxicity, right? That if you're a sales manager, you need to watch out for. And I would bet, I bought his book shortly after that show, but I would bet that every single one of those archetypes also applies to software developers, right? He talked about one that he called sort of the jungle commando or something like that, I think it is, which basically is just someone whose mission is to come in and destroy and kill everyone on the team, right? From the standpoint of, being basically, that was the way for them to be the top salesperson, is by sabotaging and destroying all other salespeople, right? And thing is, from that person's perspective, it works, right? Because they will. I mean, if you come in and sabotage and demotivate and demoralize even as a software developer, let's say, everyone else on the team, so that you're the only one that gets anything done, well, guess what? In the end, if management's clueless about that, they think, this guy's the only one writing any code. I wonder what happened. I don't know. Let's promote him, right? I think avoiding those toxic assets, I mean, that's a hiring thing, a filtering thing, right? And sometimes you have to kind of, screen those sort of folks out. But it can be a problem on teams. And usually, frankly, I think the people that know that best are, again, the other developers, right? You've got to listen to them. If you bring a new person in, hey, let's ask these 3 or 4 developers that are working side by side, what do you think of the new person? And if they all say he is terrible, right? I mean, they probably know better than that person's boss, even, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't trust any of them, then you have an even worse problem. Like, why do you have like 5 people on your team you don't trust, right? But I think frequently, those folks, I mean, they see what's being done in the code. And I remember we had a team member once at a company I was working at way back when that, this person was checking in so much bad code, and the developers were sort of secretly going and rewriting it all every night. Not because they were being sneaky. They knew that they thought that if they complained, no one would listen. So they were just fixing this person's mistakes because it was just trash, right? And finally, someone's like, "What are you guys doing here?" When they're like, "Well, this guy keeps on checking in garbage, and we're fixing it." And it's like, "What? Why didn't anyone say this?" Well, because we thought we'd be ignored. So there's a lot of problems like that. But I think the other big thing that I try to focus on, I mean, like I said, I've been pretty lucky that I don't have too much problem with toxic assets or anything, or I haven't really, occasionally. But, you mentioned communication a little bit between teams. And, communication is something that developers often struggle with when they are talking, say, communicating to clients, business level users, this sort of thing. And I think part of the role of any kind of technical team lead is coaching them on that communication, right? Helping them understand when they say certain things, even if they're completely true and honest, it's not always what people hear, right? And there's no way for them to learn that if someone doesn't help them understand that, and there's ways to be really kind how you approach that. I mean, you don't say, "Look, I heard what you said to that customer. It was terrible. It was a wrong thing to say." You sounded a little uncomfortable on the call answering some of those questions. So can we talk about, there might be some ways to answer it that bring you sort of more in a position of comfort, right? And it's common questions, right? Like if a customer says, "Well, why are there so many bugs in this code?" It's going to be the rare developer that answers that properly, right?
They're not bugs, they're features.
Well, yeah, they're going to be argumentative. Well, you didn't give me enough time. Well, I mean, who's to say they're not intentional? Yeah, exactly. Intentional features or accidental features or something, whatever you call them. But there's a right way to handle that, and I think that it's not about being sometimes technical leaders want to be the filter. Like, look, nobody talks to the developers; they talk to me. Nobody ever gets to talk to my team. And that's a mistake too, because then you end up having to just make stuff up because you don't really know the answer, right?
Yeah.
And being, not to mention just being a bottleneck. But, I mean, at least with our customers, I mean, they always talk directly to our team members, talk directly to the developers. And what that enables a lot of times is for them they feel like they're in really good hands. Like, wow, that person, they know what they're doing. But occasionally it's those sort of business questions, that sometimes developers struggle with, and you have to coach them a bit.
So you talked about there being the bottleneck because you were the only person that could talk to the team, and I spoke about how I put myself in as a filter, so I was the only person who could talk to the team, and it's a slightly different situation. I think is that in that instance, every manager in all the different departments of the company would go to everybody in the team and ask certain people for new features and new things and to fix this and add this. And the team didn't feel empowered enough to say no. Yeah. So they would say yes. And then people would kick and scream and cry because they didn't get the feature that they asked for.
Yeah.
And I've had it where other management have taken the hump with me. They're not happy with my decisions because I've said, no, you can't have that yet. And I worked with one company whose team hadn't delivered anything in 2 years because every time anybody asked for something, they said, "Oh yeah, we'll work on that," and they dropped what they were working on, work on this new feature, and then someone else had asked for something, and they dropped that new feature and work on the new one. And when I came in, I said, "Right, what are we doing? Right, you've not done what? Okay, in 2 years? Okay, we'll change that." and said, no, right, we'll set out a schedule. And then we started actually releasing their product at least once a week, if not daily, because we were saying no and prioritizing stuff. And the owner of the company didn't like it, mainly because he didn't like people saying no to him, or he couldn't have that right now. But the rest of the business really, really liked the fact that all of a sudden they were getting features to the software that they had to use day in, day out, and their customers were loving it because they had a system that worked for the most part.
Yeah, and I think that's about, and I think the important thing in those kind of relationships or situations is you have to have a contract with, a verbal contract with your team members, right? Which is, so if the CEO comes upstairs and he walks into your office, Mr. Developer or Mrs. Developer, and sits down and says, hey, I heard that you were doing something really cool on the iPad. Can I see it? Then show it to him or her, show it to them and wow them and, show off how the amazing work you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Because, and if that all goes well, the CEO is going to come back and say, hey, Sam, your team is doing amazing work. This person showed me this and it was just blah, 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 amazing. But, and here's where the contract comes in. If that CEO says, can you add, make it talk to DocuSign, whatever, right? Anything related to a change in requirements or scope, you have to just automatically say, well, you got to talk to my team leader about that. I'm okay with it, but you have to talk to him because I don't know what the schedule and budget, and I'm not privy to that, right?
Yeah.
And you have to, and then your side of the agreement is, if you ever tell the CEO no, I will not come down on you, right? If you tell the CEO, now you can't say, and of course you say, this is the communication coaching, you don't say no, right? You don't tell him, no, I can't do that. That's the wrong way to say it, right? You say, I'd be happy to, but I need to take my schedule and my task list from, my team manager. And so if you can run it by him and get that on the list, I'd be happy to, it's a very nice way to say no. And, and frankly, if you're a team leader and the CEO comes to you and says, this guy was terrible, he wouldn't do what I asked, then you got to have his back, I mean, all the way to the mat, if that's what it takes, because that's your contract, right? So things like that. So I think there's a small list of things that my team members know, and teams that I'm running know that, if this comes up, you have to very gently and in the right way, push back, and kick it up, because if you say, sure, I'll do that. Now sometimes, but you also have to say, look, if it's something small and you just feel like they're really on you about it and you say, sure, I'll just do that. Well, you can't explode over that either, right? You just say, well, all right, I guess they pinned you down on it. I'll just, let's move on. Right.
Yeah.
It's all about just being reasonable, right? But if you get someone committing to weeks of work or days of work or hours of work that you're just not in budget, then, most of the time they're doing that because they just don't know what else to do. They're not comfortable. And most of the time they're doing it because they think it's what's going to make the customer happy. Right. Sure. And when I say customer, of course, I'm referring to any internal customer, external customer, consulting client, whatever. They're all customers. Right. And so you do, kind of to your point, there are certain situations where you do have to be that filter. If you have, all kinds of customers ganging up on all kinds of developers asking for stuff and then getting told yes, but because developers aren't looking at the high level schedule, it's a recipe for disaster, right?
Yeah.
If they get one out of everything, one out of every 10 things they promised done. So, they're, but that's directing traffic is all that really is, right?
Yeah. You talked about coaching as well there, and I had a member of my team that other team members thought he was a mute. They'd never heard him speak in stand-ups, in meetings, or anything. He was very much a wallflower. He used to just turn up and go, yeah, and leave. And I introduced weekly dev meetings, and every week I would pick a new person, and you had to talk for at least 30 minutes on a topic that you'd either done some exploration on, you'd seen online, or you felt could benefit the team. And there were other members that didn't quite like the idea because they didn't like talking in front of people. But this one guy, he took to it like a fish. Fish takes the water, and he's told me since then that he doesn't think that he would be where he is in his career now if I hadn't pushed him to do that, because he then branched out and he became a contractor. And I think you can't be that type of meek and mild person if you want to be a contractor. You've got to be able to put yourself out there, and just giving your team the confidence to be able to speak. One, in a safe environment, but giving them the skills to be able to speak up for themselves and defend what they're doing and what their decisions are is a really, really good asset.
Yeah.
But I think we've talked a lot about leadership, sort of skill sets and ways to deal with certain situations. But I think one thing that developers often overlook is that they come in, they do a junior developer, they become a mid-level developer, a senior developer, maybe then they go to architect or team lead or development lead, and they feel that the next progression is leadership. But I think one thing that we should highlight is that leadership isn't for everybody, and it's okay that it's not for everybody.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Development is a weird world sometimes where, I've been on plenty of teams where you'll have, team man or, development manager, team leader, architects, lead developers, senior developers, like you said. But then the guy who actually writes most of the code is just sitting in the corner. He's just developer. His title's just developer, right? Because he doesn't care about any of that. And he makes more money than anyone else in that list, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times, if you really... And I think this is pretty pervasive. If you look at the real job titles that are supposedly tied to some of these titles, senior developer 2, software architect, team leader, project manager. There's so much just churn, or there's so much like variation in what those mean. And a lot of times they don't mean that much. Where are the roles and responsibilities really divided? And sometimes what you see, I think, is companies will create and promote people into certain titles, even though none of the responsibilities really change, especially in small companies, I think, right? It's more pervasive probably in smaller companies. Say, hey, congratulations, you're a senior developer. So we'll pay you a little more, which is basically the raise you were going to get anyway. But you don't get any more responsibilities. The job's the same, everything, right? Or they'll pencil in some responsibilities, but it doesn't really take place, And I think part of that is because, the people are always worried about losing developers. They're always worried about, sort of attrition and all this sort of stuff. And so we need to, and if you go ask your boss, like, hey, I'd really like to be promoted, they're probably pretty likely to just promote you to something, right? Well, go ahead, put the word senior in front of your title, right?
Yep.
And I know, I've experienced this and seen this so many times. And of course, then you run the risk of the people that didn't get promoted getting better and all this sort of thing. But, I do think that a lot of people, a lot of developers out there are sort of programmed to think that, well, I have to have this progression because I want to be a vice president someday. I want to be the boss someday.
Yep.
And I was certainly one of those earlier, in my career, 5, 6, 7 years in. And I remember I had a conversation with the boss and he said, don't rush it. Like, none of that is any fun. Like being the director, the VP, whatever, the manager, none of that is any fun. Like if you're a developer and you like to write code and you love that, like why would you want to be the guy who now is just basically your job is budgets and phone calls? Don't rush it until you, I think this is a key thing. Don't rush it until you're actually really bored and tired of doing the development stuff, right? And I think that was sort of true for me. I sort of had a couple really awesome positions at some startups when I was maybe 8 or 10 years into my career, and I kind of felt after I kind of got through and built those products and wrote that code, whatever. I was kind of like, well, I kind of feel like that's from a code writing standpoint, I've kind of done the difficult and gotten through and, you know what I mean, achieved kind of what I wanted to do. Like, I mean, it wasn't rocket science. I wasn't, you know, working for Google, making some new AI thing, but it just was enough for me to feel like I did hard stuff. I got through it. I figured out I achieved it. Right. So what's next? What's the next challenge? And that's the truth, is that ultimately I was getting bored writing code. Right.
Yep.
And so if you're bored, well, then that's when you need to try to move up in a way, because the flip side of boredom is mastery. Right. You know, I've and I didn't make that up, but I've read that somewhere before. You know, if you're
quoting somebody,
if you're getting really bored at writing, let's say there's a guy out there that's really bored at writing, like, you know, USB device drivers or something. He's probably pretty freaking smart at it and good at it, right? It's not because he can't do it; it's because he's done it so many times. He's in and out expert of doing whatever he's doing, or, you know, network protocols, or whatever, you know, whatever specific task there is, or even just like web apps. You can go learn a new technology. You can say, well, I don't want to do web apps anymore. I want to start doing, you know, encryption or something. You can always do that. But eventually you know, some people run out. You're like, well, now I feel like I've done everything. Maybe I want to move up and start another challenge, you know. And for me, initially, I guess the challenge was managing teams. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to move up and manage teams, and then I'm going to grow a consulting business, right? But then the challenges have morphed over time. That, you know, now, I mean, the challenges I have now are like marketing challenges, you know, and content challenges and leadership challenges and stuff. And I'm not worried about trying to learn the latest version of .NET or something, right? And so in a way, it's like, you know, I think that can be a good indicator if it's time to move up. But when you talk to people that just say, well, I want to move up because I want to make more money, or because I want to have a solid, I have this, you know, imprinted in my head from years of what my parents told me that I need to be moving up the ladder and getting promoted and all this stuff. I mean, sometimes that can be for the wrong reason. You know, you
definitely.
You put that person, and, you know, let's imagine someone's a rock star developer, and you say, hey, guess what? You can be vice president of quality assurance. Oh, wow, I'm vice president. They're going to hate that job, and they're going to be bad at it probably, right? But they'll probably do it because they'll be so excited about being a VP.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I know a good couple of developers that amazing developers, really, really strong at what they do. Great to work with. Awesome if you have them in your team. And they all did that normal sort of zombie walk, if you like, from developer into manager.
Mm-hmm.
And then they woke up one day and went, how the hell did I get here?
Yeah.
What happened? I hate this. Absolutely hate this.
Yep.
And they drop back and they're developers again, and they absolutely love it. So it's definitely not for everybody. And I'm a bit of a weird fish where I like writing code, really like writing code, but I also like the management side of it. Not to the point where I want to be managing budgets and all that sort of thing and doing the marketing, like you said, but I like to help the team to achieve the goal, to build the product and empower them to see their project through. And I guess that even, you know, if you want to do that sort of management, is that you don't need to be the boss to be that sort of leader in a team.
Yeah. And it's funny. Where I've kind of ended up, because, you know, I've been on this, I mean, I've been running my own company now for 13 years. And like I said, when I started out, I think I mentioned this, I was a one-man company writing code, right? You know, in 2008, January 2008. And then I said, hey, you know, Mr. Customer, can I hire some people and like be the project manager? Sure, I'll try it. Sure, you know. So I was writing code on my project and then managing people on another project, and you know, that evolved. And eventually I stopped writing code, and then I'm hiring marketing people and hiring salespeople and hiring and dealing with contracts and lawyers and accountants and everything, right? Payroll, whatever. But for me now, like the you know, the greatest thrill, it's not just about like managing a team. Like, I mean, I think what you said is great, like managing a team to fruition and seeing a project get done. But actually, like, the greatest thrill is like if I close a project for a customer and then say, okay, here's the project, folks, and Mr. Team Leader and your team associates, here it is. You know, here's what we're doing. Here's the scope, the spec, the hours, the budget, whatever, the time that we all work together on. tally forth and do it. And then 6 months later, if they come back and we're like, all right, we're done and customer's good. And if I had no interaction whatsoever and I know nothing about it, like that's the goal. That's the thrill, right? Because then it's like I created this organism that is self-sustaining. And it's sort of like with your body. I mean, you don't have to sit there and think, okay, lungs, let's breathe now. Okay, now breathe out. Like it happens on its own, right? And to me, that's now where I want to be. And it doesn't always happen. I'm not always good at it myself, right?
I definitely work with some developers that I've wondered if they have to consciously remember to breathe in and out, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, that can happen. But that's, I think that's the thing is like, I guess what I'm trying to say, wrapping it all up, and you kind of said too, is don't change positions or worry about promotion unless, your goals actually truly have changed, like the type of work you want to be doing changes. And I remember when I was younger, maybe 5-6 years into my career, I was totally obsessed with, I need to be promoted to a senior developer or an architect. Like if I'm not, then it's a knock on me, right? And if somebody else got promoted, it was a knock on me, right? And I mean, it wasn't a money thing. I was perfectly happy with income, whatever. But why did I want? But I liked writing code. I didn't want to change that. I didn't want to do anything different. So why was I worried about it? Well, it was just ego, right? And I've talked to folks before, other developers and developers working for me, and they say, well, I think I want to start to kind of move into some management. And it's like, why? Well, it seems like a skill I should have. Well, it's like, I mean, are you sure? So like align it to the work you really want to do, and sort of what excites you in like an outcome, and not just, I feel like I want to have it on my business card. Because the truth is, nobody really cares. I mean, in the business world, if you're an architect, lead developer, team leader, project, it doesn't mean anything. People, maybe some people would take offense to that, but you and I both know people whose title is, VP of architecture, and they're completely clueless,
Yeah, definitely work with some of those. They've just been promoted to the point where they can make the least negative impact.
Well, and it's funny, this weekend I was listening to Malcolm Gladwell's, he was interviewing, talking to the creator, who I can't remember his first name, but his last name is Peter. And he created the idea of the Peter principle, right? I always thought it was like, I didn't know what the word meant, but it was actually the guy's last name was Peter, right? The inventor. And that's what he said, as people get promoted to the position in which basically, they one step above and they'd be doing too much damage to go any higher, more or less. I'm paraphrasing it. And you don't want to be that person. And there's a lot of, there's a ton of complexities that sort of result around that, and how you manage that in your business, but ultimately, I think people that get promoted too soon up into those roles, they're not happy either. They're not enjoying themselves. They'd have a lot more fun. I had an old boss at one point that he was pretty miserable. He just really didn't like his job at all, and he hated working there, and he was our team leader or something of like maybe 10 developers. And the thing, when we would be in meetings, he would burn up hours talking about was this access program that he wrote in his spare time. I want to show, look what I added. I added this thing. And it was totally unrelated to the business, had nothing to do with the company. It was just his little like pet project. And we're like, why is he telling us about this? Why are we talking about access development like on company time, right? Because he was so bored, Yeah.
Well, and I think that's a big indicator. So that's where his passion was. His passion was in creating.
Yeah.
And maybe he didn't have the newer skills to go and build something with the technologies that are now available, but he was able to do it with access.
Yeah. He would have been so much happier in his life if he had just found a programming gig and access somewhere, and it's, he always said, and I think it's true, that this is the other problem is this, then you have golden handcuffs, right? At that point, well, I can't do what I actually love because I'd be taking a 20% pay cut. I'm like, that's sad.
I think a lot of us can live and attest to that. I've been there. I fell out of love with writing software a few years ago, and looked around and thought, well, this is the lifestyle I like and I enjoy. What else can I do And I looked around the things that I had a passion for and enjoyed doing, and nothing would afford me and my family the lifestyle that we were accustomed to.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a case of, well, suck it up. And then I eventually found that it was a mindset that I had, that the reason I'd fallen out with it, and took a new approach to writing software and my career and stuff, and rejuvenated that. And I'm back, and I love every day that I write software, even those stressful days or stressful weeks where you just want to hate the world. You still get to the end of the week and think, do you know what? I probably wouldn't want to be out there doing anything else right now. This is where my passion is.
It's a great gig,
So,
I mean, it really is I've read before, and I think it's true that, being a software developer is one of the very few careers, more or less, where you can make well over 6 figures of income without a master's degree, PhD, any certifications whatsoever. I mean, you don't have to have Microsoft, but nothing, right? You just, you don't even need to have a college degree in it. I mean, I've one of the most just brilliant software developers I've ever worked for. I mean, this guy literally wrote the book on C++. He wrote a book called C++ Software Development, published by Microsoft, and he was the author, right? Mike Oliver. And he, his degree was in, like marine biology or oceanography, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't matter, and he's obviously very successful still, I'm sure. And so that's what, I've counseled a lot of kids in college and high school and stuff about, well, what should I go into? Should I get an IT degree? Should I get a computer science degree? Whatever. Right. And it's like, well, I mean, writing software is a great gig if you can get into it. And most of the time it's a lot more fun than management, trying to get into management. And that's the thing too, is people have to understand, if, just to maybe round out our prior topic there, if you get promoted into management of a team, well, then you have to be better than the other managers to succeed, right? To really succeed. Like, you can't just get promoted into it and they say, well, so let's say now your title is, director or something. Well, they're not going to look at you and say, well, you were a really good programmer, and therefore now we're going to promote you from director to VP. No, you have to be a really good director, right?
Yeah.
And that's a different thing.
Definitely.
Whereas, if you stay in development long enough and try to keep up to date, which is a challenge, by the time you've been doing it for 20, 30 years, you can pretty easily say that I'm probably, I'm a very, very strong developer, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah. I think some of the takeaways from the conversation is that leadership isn't for everybody, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Don't rush into being a leader, because you got into software development for a reason, and that reason was probably because you enjoyed it, and that's where your passion is. And moving to leadership, you don't often get to write a lot of code anymore, unless you're in a hands-on lead role, and then you're not in real management. You're kind of middle management, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
But if all of those still don't put you off, and some of the listeners out there, they wanted to actually move into management and leadership, are there any pearls of wisdom that you can give them, somewhere to start? Is it going out and reading books? Is it doing a course, or what is it?
It's a good question. So I guess the route I took, and there's some great books I can recommend, particularly around consulting. There's a book that I there's an author named Gerald Weinberg, wrote a book called Secrets of Consulting that I think is a real Bible, right, for any kind of management. Because consulting a lot of times consulting is all about leadership and management and customers and everything else, right? So that's a great book. That's kind of like my Bible. But the other thing, what I did is I went and I got my MBA, right? And which was totally foreign to me coming in as a software developer, because most MBA programs are heavily corporate finance, right?
Yeah.
And you think, I'm going to, the name of the degree is, Master in Business Administration. Well, what is business administration? What does that mean? I don't know.
Filing.
I don't know what, it sounds like filing, a clerk, or, I really don't know what that term means, because have you ever seen anyone saying we are hiring for the position of business administrator. And if you hear the course executive admins and administrative assistant, you see titles like that, but no one is like, well, I am the chief business administrator, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of but what it really means, at least in the program that I was in Xavier University in Cincinnati, is dealing with the money, and really understanding that, business is about money, period, at least in the United States. And, developers don't get that window very often, right? They don't get to see that window very often. And I think if you were to go out and if you're a developer and you kind of have your mindset in the world of development, if you go out and you really devote yourself to getting your MBA in a good program, it will change the way you look at the business you're in, and it will make you much, much more valuable to that business and much more likely to succeed in a management role. Because most of those management roles, I mean, a good part of it is budgeting and finance, right? I mean, it's a piece of any true management role, I would almost say, I mean, people can beg to differ, but if you're a manager and you don't have to worry about dollars and cents, then, are you really in leadership of that department? Because I mean, somebody else is worrying about what your people are getting paid and it's out of your hands and stuff. Right. And, but, and it's simple things. Like, I think, doing that program for me, it was like, oh, now I understand why when I say, hey, Mr. Boss, I want to do something. I want to add this feature. He says no. And I was so frustrated that he said no, right? Well, he said no because there was no revenue opportunity for it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But I didn't know that. I didn't understand that, because you think, but my design is beautiful, but the code is wonderful. Why aren't you letting me do it? Right. Yeah. So that's, that's maybe the old school advice is like, hey, go get a degree in it. And that's a major investment. Right. There's another program. What was it? There's a website you can go to that I can't remember the title of it, but it's like the Weekend MBA or something like that. But this guy has collected a bunch of books that basically theoretically, if you read all these books, you're going to get maybe 70% of the knowledge that, and if you really read them closely, that you would have gotten by going to get an MBA. Right. So you don't necessarily have to go back to school for it, though. I think that helps, but I think that's, again, maybe that's a big commitment to make, but it can yield some pretty incredible results.
Yeah. And I think by going out and doing that, you're expanding your horizon and you're giving yourself the ability to change mindsets. Because I come from a graphics background, graphic design, and had to teach myself the mindset for a developer. It's still creative, but it's a very different creative to 3D modeling and graphic design and things like that I used to do. And by going out and getting your MBA, you are adding that extra string to your bow, giving yourself the ability to learn something new. Yeah. And not everyone is cut out to be able to mind shift like that.
Yeah.
So definitely, I would say to the listeners is don't feel like you have to go down that route to leadership.
Yeah.
Try and find some solace and enjoyment in the fact that you're writing code and that's what you really enjoy doing.
Well, and I think, and exactly. And I think if you do have the goal of being a vice president at a Fortune 500, some piece of advice someone gave me once is, companies like that, they look for, does this person have their MBA, for instance, because they don't want to be in a meeting and have someone remark something or ask a question about, that person's the stock's market cap, and have that person, what's that? I mean, there's basic financial understanding and management theories and stuff and marketing theories and stuff that they want to know that and having an MBA is a nice check mark for that. So I think it really can help you succeed and maybe get to those higher levels. But like you said, don't assume that is somehow a measure of whether or not you're a success or a failure, because that's not really what matters.
Yeah, definitely. So we're out of time for today. So it just leaves me to say thank you for coming on and talking to us about this very vast topic. I think it's been good. I've really enjoyed it, and hopefully the listeners have got something out of it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And I know it's a deeply philosophical conversation, maybe, but hopefully we touched on some high points that will help some folks.
Yeah. I think we did. Because I think a lot of people have very high hopes for their career, and they want to do this and they want to do that, and some hard hitting home truths are always welcome. I think, and they need to be said. Give the listener something to think about as well. Yeah. And having said that, I'd like to thank them all for listening to The Cynical Developer. I'm James Stoddart, and you've been listening to Sam Schutte talking about leadership for developers. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, then drop us an email, a tweet, or leave a comment on the website where you can find all the resource links, show notes for each episode. And if you enjoy this episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is, and help The Cynical Developer to reach more developers around the globe.